Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura's Handmade Haven. Welcome or welcome back. I'm so glad you joined me today. This is week 12 of our Let's Bake Quilt Sew Along. And what makes week 12 special? Oh my goodness, by the end of this video, we're gonna have all of our borders on our quilt top center and we'll have a completed quilt top ready for quilting. I'm so excited. So if you've been sewing along and this is where you're at, if you're working on your borders too, please stay tuned because hopefully I'll be able to share a few tips and tricks with you to make your process smooth and easy. If you need the links of the borders, please refer to page 12 of the Sew Along Guide. All of them are laid out for you right there. And always make sure you double check your quilt top center to make sure that the lengths are correct for your quilt. Because sometimes depending on if your 1/4 inch might be a smidge off, then you're going to need to adjust the length of your borders for your inner and outer borders. Hopefully you're not too far off because with that stitched flower border, you might run into a few problems. So without further ado, we are going to grab my first set of borders and head to the cutting table, but we're actually going to be pinning first. I know. I tell you a million times over, I am not a pinner, and I'm not until it comes to those borders because it's very important to get those evenly dispersed along the entire side of your quilt top. Otherwise, you're going to have ripples and ruffles and puckers when you go to quilt it, and it's not going to lay flat and you're not going to be happy, and all of that effort is going to be for nothing. So we're going to grab the quilt top center and our first set of borders and go to the cutting table to start pinning on those borders. The first tip I want to share with you is actually at the pressing table. I forgot about this. If you're a new quilter or maybe you just haven't thought about this, the first thing I like to do with my borders is fold them perfectly in half, and I just like to press that. And that way I have the halfway point on my border because that's what I line up first on my quilt top center is the center of my quilt. Another little tip for you is after I cut my borders, I like to lay them over my cart on a design board and I put them in order. So I know when I'm looking at this from my side, this is my first, second, third, and fourth of these border strips. So I know that this is my inner border sides, inner border top and bottom, outer border sides, and outer border top and border bottom. And I'll leave them on here until I go to pin them onto the quilt. And I don't have to worry about labeling them, and I don't have to worry about losing track of what borders what. Now I do use pens, and I use different pens for different things. If I'm going to be pinning something on that I want to iron, I definitely use my glass head pens, and both of these are actually glass head pens, just different brands. But if I go to pin my borders on, I like using really long pins. And I love these from Riley Blake. They're the little bluebird head pins. They're easy to pull out as I'm moving down the side of my quilt as I'm putting my border on, and I can put them right back in this case, easy peasy. I work with a pretty small table when I'm laying out my quilts, but it does not deter me one bit. So this is how I do it. I take my quilt top center and I just fold it in half, matching the little corners. And then I'll finger press a little crease right in the center. Now, is this the exact perfect center? Maybe not, but it's gonna be close enough. It's gonna be fine. Now, when I lay this back out flat, I can see this is where my little finger press was. And remember, I pressed all my borders in half as well. So now I can just take this border and put it right on that little finger press, and that's where my first pen is going to go. And this is why I like these pens. Look, I can pin this into place, but that little bird sticks way out there, and that's going to be really easy to grip and grab and pull out. Then I'm just going to go to one of the ends and pin that into place. Then I'm going to give this a little tug, and I'm going to stick a couple more pins in the side just to hold it, just to get that evenly dispersed down the side of my quilt. All right, so I will go ahead and pin both of my side borders on because I can sew both of those on before I have to worry about the top and bottom. So I'm just going to flip this around and do the same thing to the other side. I'm going to fold it in half, corners together, move my finger all the way out, and give this a nice little finger press. before laying it flat on the edge of the table and pinning the other side border into place. And I'll continue to do the same thing for all the other borders. I'm probably not going to show this step every single time because I figure, you know, if you have it once, you have it, right? All right, so now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew the borders, the side borders on, and then we'll start talking about those pieced flower borders. So another tip for you is when you start working with your quilt top center, if you are going to be building out and out and out, it's going to be a lot of weight on your machine. So I like to try to put a little table or something beside my table to kind of extend that out. Now there have definitely been times that I've also used like an ironing board to set level with the top of the table or a folding table, depending on the size of the quilt. This one is pretty small, so I'm not too worried about it. But if I was working with a king size quilt, I would probably bring out the ironing board or my folding table to get to the same size, the same height as my sewing table, just to take some of that weight off of the machine and give my quilt top a place to drape. But even that little table, and that's like a little TV tray that I've covered and I use for a pressing table at retreats, it works great too. Now remember, with this first inner border, you are sewing next to applique blocks. So there may be times that you're close to applique shapes and you may need to slow down or just really kind of hold your fabric in place because it could wiggle on you. If you're too close to that applique shape, just the additional weight, the additional height from that applique piece will cause your little 1/4 inch seam to wiggle if you're not careful. So just keep that in mind as you're moving down these first borders around those applique blocks. The inner border is the only one you need to worry about that with because remember our stitch flowers are already into their little blocks, so applique is not close to the edge on those and you won't have to worry about that for your outer border either. Now instead of cutting my thread here, this quilt top is large enough that I'm just going to swing it around and start the other side. And once I have the sides started, then I probably will cut the thread that chains them together. And that's just, I don't know, that way my needle doesn't come in unthreaded on the machine and I don't have to slow down for that. I am in awe of people that can pull a pin and continue sewing at the same time. I have not mastered that. So I still stop at pretty much each pin, unless I just sew over it. These pins are so small, they're so thin that you can sew over them. I mean, I would recommend it because someone's gonna break a needle in a minute and then you're gonna yell at me, so don't do it. But if you see me doing it, just know that I know the risk. Now that I have the side inner borders on, I will take it back to the side of the table and pin on the top and bottom. And it's the same process for that. I have the inner border onto the quilt top center, so now it's time to do the stitch flowers. Hopefully you marked your borders when you were putting them together. If not, you're going to figure that out. But remember, your side borders have 6 flowers and the top and bottom have 8. And then, I mean, really, I don't think it's really going to matter that much which one goes on the right, which one goes on the left, which one is the top and the bottom. It's your quilt. You do you, right? So I do have mine labeled. So I'm going to take the right border off the design wall first. And obviously, I want to make sure that my flowers are going the right way. So pay attention to which way your flowers are going in your strip. And I'm just going to use the same exact method to pin those onto the side of my quilt top center, which now includes the inner border. The first thing I'm going to do is just find the center of my border, and that should be 3 blocks above and below. So when I lay this onto my quilt, just to double check myself, I will lay it flat and say, yep, that goes the same way, and then I'll flip it over. So I can use the mark that I'd made the first time and the pressing mark in my inner border to line up this first point, which is the center of the side border. And again, I'm just going to pin it right here. Then I'll pin one end, kind of give it a little tug to make sure it's evenly dispersed among that side, that section. And pin it into place so it's ready for the machine. And again, if your quarter inch seam was a little off when you're putting your border flowers together, you may have to adjust this a little bit. You could, if you're a little big, you could definitely just find one of the seams and between the blocks and sew this down a little bit more just to adjust for that length that you need to take out of the border. If you're a little bit short, I would suggest either adding a little strip between, or you could reduce the seam allowance a little bit. I think that as long as you have, I wouldn't go any smaller than 1/8 of an inch, but that would gain you like 1/4 of an inch. So you could do that too. Just a couple ways you can adjust the length of your side borders if you have to. And this is, like I said, this is when you kind of get into trouble if your quarter inch seam is not close. Because, I mean, let's be honest, you can tug it a little bit. Fabric stretches and you can make it work if you're just a little bit off. If you were just 1/4 of an inch off, I don't think I'd worry about it. I would simply just stretch your fabric border or just stretch them and make them work and ease it in, or get it a little longer. All right, so here's my left border. And again, I'm just going to use that mark that I had from my pressed border before to line up my center, and then I will pin at each end and in between, and we'll be ready for the sewing machine. Now with my stitch border, I am going to try to make a conscious effort to have my seam allowances between these blocks going at the same direction. So I am going to try to make a conscious effort to do that. This is going to be the exact same process though as with the inner border. You're just going to sew it along and keep going. But see, like here where this is definitely wanting to press up, I'm going to make sure that this seam allowance does go up. And the other thing I'm going to make sure is this inner border, that seam allowance is pointing out to the inner border and not up. Now you could definitely pin those into place, and if that makes you feel more confident in your stitching, you should totally do that. All right, so the only difference between our side borders and our top and bottom borders, we have another pinning point that I would like to point out to you. And that's just because this first block needs to nest with this first block on the side border. So when I go to pin this, I'm going to start in the center just as before, using that little crease line from the inner border. And then the next place I'm going to pin is going to be right here where these seams intersect. So I'm just going to feel where that is, where that little junction is. And I'm going to put a pin across those seams to hold that in place for me. And that is the only additional pinning point that I would recommend you do on your top and bottom pieced flower borders. And the rest of it's just, you know, the same. I probably do add a few extra pins into the top and bottom borders than I do the sides, but I mean, they're bigger too. But yeah, that just might be a good little one. So again, on the corner, I just want to make sure that this block and this block, that these little seams, that they nest correctly. That's where I'm going to pin first. after the center, you know. So I pin the center, I pin the other side, and now on this side, the first place I'm going to pin is that little junction. And then the outer corner just to hold it in place. You wouldn't necessarily have to have that one, but I don't know. It's there. And then a few more points along the line just to make sure that your border is evenly spaced along the side or the top and bottom of your quilt. I've pinned on the outer border onto my quilt, and I've left my little pin sticking out the side because I'm actually going to flip my quilt top over and I'm going to put the border on the bottom. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I want to make sure none of my pieced blocks have twisted seams. So I want to keep a close eye on them, and it's much easier to do that if they're on top than on the bottom. Now, since these pins are so long and thin, I'm able to keep my little birds kind of out to the side, and I can see where all my seams are at. So like I want this one, let's see, this little guy goes, yeah, let's go down with this. It's also going to make sure that I line everything up really well, because I'm going to be honest and tell you that some of my blocks in the piece border are not perfectly square like this one here. So it's just going to give me the ability to make sure that all of that is kind of squared up as I sew. And I know that's not really a conventional method, but it's my method and it works. See, now I can see that this seam is going down, so I don't want this one to go up, because then when I press it, it's going to get twisted somewhere and my quilt top won't lie flat. So I'm going to make sure that this one is also sewn down. And that's what I'm going to do all the way down the sides and the top and bottom of the quilt. So I'll pin the borders on just as I showed you before. I'm just leaving the little birds stick out to the side so I can grab them. And that's another reason why I love those bird pens, because the heads on them are so large that it's easy. But any pen will work. There's also some really cute flowers and heart pens on the market. I'll put a link to those in the description box down below. Any large headed pen will work. And like I said, I'm just going to check to see where that is, how it's positioned, to position this side the same way, just so I don't get those twisted seams. So this is one of my side borders that is completed. I'll go ahead and put the other side, the top and bottom, on using the same method. And then we will have our grand reveal. One last tip on your outer border: when you're putting on your top and bottom border, this is what I like to do, just because I long arm my quilts. And sometimes those seams will start to kind of give and come out a little bit if you aren't careful. But even though I've decreased my stitch length down to 2.0, I like to do a little back stitch at the beginning and end of the top and bottom border, or whatever the last border is that I'm putting on the quilt. Now, if I was putting a pieced border on to the quilt as my outer border, then I would run a stitch about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch around the entire perimeter of the quilt. And that is just going to make sure that I have a really good results when I go to long arm it, that nothing's going to come apart on me. I'm going to continue working on my top and bottom outer border, and then I will have it up on the design wall to show it off. Here it is. We have finished our Let's Bake quilt. I am so excited. This looks so good. I love it so much. Now, just in case this is the first time you've caught one of my videos for this quilt along, just let you know, I use scraps from like 3 or 4 previous projects. All of the fabrics are Lori Holt by Riley Blake. But there are fabrics in this quilt from the Autumn line, from Mercantile, Hometown, and even some Stitch. So there's a huge variety of fabrics in this quilt, and I have had so much fun putting it together. I really do hope that you have found some of the tips and tricks that I've shared with you to be helpful for this quilt or another craft project you have going on in your space. I really hope that you have enjoyed the videos and that you will continue to watch my other videos, because we have some pretty fun things coming up for the rest of this year and going into next. I also have content on my channel about Cricut projects, so if you're a paper crafter or you like heat transfer vinyl, make sure you check those out. I'm also trying to incorporate some other like little home decor projects and just pretty much anything I can think of, because I'm going to be honest with you and tell you, I like crafting, and anything that I can create just brings me such joy, and I love sharing that with you. So please leave me a comment down below and let me know what you are into these days in your craft space. Where are you finding your joy? And what would you like to see me create, so I can share some tips with you on my process as well. I really do hope that you love this quilt as much as I do, although I don't think it's possible, because I am so in love with this quilt. I cannot wait to get it quilted. Make sure you tune into my Instagram on social media, because I'll be sharing pictures of the finished quilt there, and I might put one on the community tab here on YouTube too. Anyway, until next time, find joy in all you do. Carve out some time for crafting and creating, and remember, it's always better when you make stuff up.